Nina and Jenna and everyone on the Engage team for making this day possible. I am so excited to share day 2 of Both and Worship. Yesterday, we talked about the why and some of the how and what behind why we need to continue our hybrid ministry and really double down and lean into it. We talked about 13 reasons why we should continue and 5 areas of focus. And today, we're going to dig even deeper into the how and the what. And I'm going to give you some strategies for how you can really dial into hybrid and create what I call truly hybrid experiences of worship for people both in the room and online at the same time. If we've never met, my name is Jason Moore. My ministry is Midnight Oil Productions, and I am really passionate about creating deep, meaningful, creative hybrid worship, and that will be our topic for today. If you are following along, you're going to have a much easier time if you download the handbook. So I have just put the QR code on the screen, which you can scan, and it is being put in the chat as well so that you can participate along with us today. Hopefully you will find that to be a very helpful resource. I want to also just mention that we're going to have some giveaways today. A little later, I'm going to give away a Secret Worshiper consultation. That's where I come. I'm not going to do it physically in your space, but we're going to do it online. It's a $500 value, so one of you will have the opportunity to win that for today, one yesterday, and then one tomorrow as well. And I'll give you the information at the end on how to do that. Text in Church also has some giveaways for you. Hang around to the end. Tyler will tell you about them, but I want to tell you about the free 60-day pro membership that you can get for just attending. All you have to do is scan that QR code or follow the link in the chat, and you'll be able to sign up. I want to say that prior to doing this particular training for Text in Church, I've had the opportunity to lead versions of this training about 90 times, and I have always recommended Text in Church. I'm a huge fan. In fact, I asked Tyler to record a video. Tyler's been making appearances in my Both and trainings for a couple of years now and making that offer. And so I really hope that you'll take advantage of that if you haven't. Last thing I want to mention here is that there is a VIP pass, which will give you access to a couple of books. You can get a copy of my Both and book, which this is based on, and also the Boomerang book, which is an incredible book that I was happy to endorse that has all kinds of great information about guest follow-up and so on and so forth. So I hope that you will sign up with that for that. And without further ado, we will get started. So that is my very Stranger Things inspired intro, and I do really believe that it is possible for us to create experiences of worship where people both in the room and online feel like they're a part of it. I'm going to ask again today, how many of you were online prior to the pandemic? Just throw it in the chat, or for my live audience, you can raise your hand. How many of you were online before the pandemic? All right, some of our early adopters, very good. And how many of you went online with the pandemic? You can put it in the chat or raise your hand for my audience here today. Whether you went online before or when the pandemic hit, again, I just am so in awe of you and all that you've done this last couple of years. It's been a tough couple of years of ministry, but we've all kind of met the challenge and had to think about how to do worship in a new way. Very quickly, I just want to mention that there's a shift that has happened, and I think we are in a critical moment in the life of the church as we think about continuing hybrid worship. For many of us that were online prior to the pandemic, the reality of online worship often looked like this. We welcomed everybody to the experience of worship, and we talked to them kind of away from the camera, and then we would often do a little nod and say, oh, and if you're worshiping with us at home today, we are so glad you're here. And then we'd more or less go back to talking to the room for the rest of the hour. And then when the pandemic hit, for those of us that were online, we shifted to talking directly to the camera. And some of you went online for the very first time where you began talking to the camera when you started your online ministry. So you only knew talking to the camera. And then as the pandemic allowed us to do so, we started to go back to the building. And I think some of us, without really meaning to, began to shift back to the old way, where we would talk to the room. Now, I think pre-pandemic, talking to the room and giving a nod to at home was perfectly acceptable. We didn't know any different. But I do think that we kind of woke people up to the reality of what it feels like to be engaged in worship as people talk to us and engage us in chat and all of those things. So friends, when I say both and worship, truly hybrid worship is where you're creating an experience for people both in the room and at home where everybody feels like they're the primary audience. And I've had people actually say recently to me that they are considering not doing online worship anymore.
What?
Seriously, they're saying that. And so there's this idea that most of our people are back in the room and we don't need to continue our hybrid. And friends, I hope that because you're here today, you're not considering that, or if you are, that this will convince you that we've got to continue. And we're going to talk about some different ways to do it. One of my favorite things about 2020 was watching how churches were iterating every week. They were innovating. They were trying new things. I've never seen the church be so malleable and so creative. It was incredible to watch. But you know, what seemed to happen over time was that we figured out, after we experimented a while, that we could do this, this, and this. We found 3 tricks that worked. And we started doing those 3 tricks over and over and over. And what was pretty incredible started to become a little bit templated, a little bit rote. And the problem with the trick that you do again and again and again is it starts to lose its luster over time. I've had people more recently say to me, we have a lot of people back in the building, but our online numbers have dropped, and the numbers online have dropped, and they don't match the number of people that have come back to the building. And I think part of the reason that's happened is that we have become a little bit complacent with the old way of doing things. We are not continuing to iterate. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and not far from where I live is a business center that was started by the man who put the Imes Pet Food Company on the map. They're based out of Dayton, Ohio here. A man named Clay Mathiel, and he's got a quote hanging on the wall that I love so much, one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I think it speaks to this moment, and I want to share it with you. Clay says this about innovation. He says, the only difference between a rut and a groove is how long you've been in it. The only difference between a rut and a groove is how long you've been in it. I think back in 2020, we found a new groove, and it was exciting and exhilarating and exhausting in some ways. And over time, we maybe let that groove become a rut. And so if it's been a while since you've done something new, if you haven't experimented for a while, if you haven't tried something, today is a challenge to try some new things. I'm going to give you 3 different forms of hybrid or both and worship to consider. And you may be on one of them and need to shift to another. You may experiment with other forms as well. I want to go all the way back to the beginning, though, because in the beginning of this thing, I saw so many experiments, and they were fun to watch. They were funny to watch at times. If you are participating in the chat, I can't see you, but I would love to kind of experience your reaction to this. So use the chat to feedback. If you see something that's funny, you can give me an LOL or a sigh or a ha ha ha, or you can groan if you'd like or whatever. But let's take a look at what I call great moments in online innovative worship. And so these are recreations of some of the things that I saw early on in the pandemic in the early days. The first one I call the cheap seats. You just threw a camera in the back of the room. You need a magnifying glass to know who is worshiping or who's preaching in this particular service. I don't know if that looks familiar to anyone, but this next church took the opposite approach. I call this one too close for comfort. You might want to back that camera off just a hair. This next one I call surveillance camera worship. We would use any technology we could find. I like this one because no one steals anything off the altar table anymore, and it's got night vision, which means we can do services later at night. Some of us started integrating new technology pretty early. We turned on the captions. Just be careful with those captions. Like, here's a pastor, a friend of mine He's in Georgia. Good morning, jerks. Thanks so much for spending your Palm Sunday with us. I told him during the Secret Worshiper consultation he really shouldn't call his congregation jerks. But this next one I call Defying Gravity. This church's tagline is "Come hang out with us." Every once in a while worship goes sideways. This one is so much fun. The comments are great. You sound great, but can you turn the camera? My neck's starting to hurt. We used any technology we could in the early days. I call this next one Ring Doorbell Worship. Just step out on your front porch, broadcast your worship to whoever's watching your security feed. Or one of the late innovations that I saw was what we call Zoom filtered worship. I am not a cat. I am not a cat. I am not a cat. So if you've never seen the lawyer Zoom cat video, when this is over, go to YouTube. You'll find it. It's incredible. A lawyer had to appear in court. His daughter had been playing with his Zoom account, and he couldn't turn off the cat filter and had to talk to the judge with that filter on. Go check out the video. It's a whole lot of fun. Well, that was really meant to kind of get us warmed up, get us excited, get us laughing a little, loosen things up. We're going to talk about 3 forms of both and worship. I want to talk to you about what I call pre-both and worship, and that's the idea that you might pre-record your online worship. We're going to talk about what I call real-time both and worship, and that's the idea that you would do live streaming, but how do you do that in a both and way? And then we're going to talk about post both and worship, and how do we do worship where maybe we record it and we do it, we broadcast it or put it out at a later time, we post-edit it. I believe that your church, whether you're large or small, whether you do traditional worship or non-traditional worship or anything in between, whether you have a lot of money, whether you don't have very much money, whether you are tech savvy, whether you don't know anything about technology, one of these will work for you. And so I hope that you will find yourself in one of them. If you don't find yourself in the first one, you may in the second one. If not the second one, the third one, and so on. Also just want to mention that I not only am presenting this today, but I'm hanging with you in the chat today. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and I will try and answer them. But I hope that you'll participate in that way. I'm in 2 places at once, which is going to relate to our very first model here. We're going to talk about pre-both and worship. Let's define this. I define pre-both and worship as 2 separate experiences. Your online experience is for online exclusively. So you're going to pre-record it. And the in-person is for people who are gathered in person exclusively. You're not going to stream at all that experience of worship. So it's both and, because you're doing something for people in the room and you're doing something for people online. And there's advantages and disadvantages to these different models that I want to talk through with you. The first advantage really is that you do not have to split your attention between 2 different groups of people. That's the hard part of doing real time or live streaming, is that if you don't want people at home to just feel like observers or spectators, you have to talk to the room and you have to talk to the camera and you have to go back and forth. And when you don't do that, imagine, friends, if I had done this whole presentation today like this, and I was talking to my room and I don't ever look at the camera or don't make you feel like a part of it, you'd feel pretty disconnected pretty quickly. As I can see in the chat, some of you are like, yeah, that would definitely do it. Goodbye. I'm ready to head out, right? So there are advantages. Another advantage is that if you're in a smaller church or if you're in a rural area, if you don't have good internet, you can pre-record your online experience of worship, and then you can upload that at a later time. If you are someone who would really like to do worship more like it looked in 2019, this model would probably serve you well, because it means that you can basically do what you've always done in the room and not have to worry about people worshiping in real time online with you. And then you can create an experience that is pre-recorded that is really meant for people who are worshiping with you online. Another thing that I think is great about this particular model is that you get to eliminate 2 of the 3 challenging factors when live streaming. You have 3 different ways 3 different obstacles that get in the way when you broadcast live. You have the upstream from your church or your building or wherever you're at to the platform. The platform is Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, Church Online platform, whatever you're using. And then you have the platform itself. So the upload to the platform, your internet speed, the platform can have issues. So sometimes that can slow down the speed or make it stop. Or I just had a church the other day tell me that Facebook turned off their feed in the middle because they had a copyright violation. So there's a challenge. And then the third thing is that you have the download. And so the people that are worshiping at home, you have to compete with that. When you pre-record your worship, you don't have to worry about upload speed. It can take days to upload as long as it's online on time. When it's on the platform, there's time for that data to be crunched and chewed on, and it's going to deliver better than if you're trying to do it in real time and all that conversion is happening. I also know one church that is doing sort of a test run with their service to identify copyright violations beforehand. So they'll upload it at like 2 o'clock in the morning and let it stream live. And if there are any, I call it a test stream, if there are any violations, they'll pull them out and then re-upload. And they're not doing it live in the moment, but before the worship happens. So let's talk about some considerations for your pre-recorded worship that you really want to consider. First is service length. I'm going to ask in the chat, how long was your worship prior to the pandemic? Average length. Just put it in the chat. How many of you were doing like an hour-long service or an hour and 15 or 45 or whatever? All right, I'm seeing all sorts of different things in the chat. Very good. So when the pandemic hit, how many of you made some adjustments to your time? How many of you maybe shortened the length of your worship experience online versus what you were doing? Put it in the chat. Would love to see your response. Some of you did and some of you didn't. Very good. One of the ways that I have framed this conversation throughout the last couple of years is to think about how books become films. A book takes days to read. A film takes a couple hours to watch. And so one of the things we have to do is consolidate the story. You can't tell the same story in a film that you do in the book because it takes a long time to experience that. And people online have a different experience with worship than they do in the room. Some of you may be familiar with Nona Jones. Nona is an incredible author, leader, speaker, coach, consultant, and pastor. And back in 2020, I was invited to speak at an event for digital church planters alongside Nona. And when I wasn't teaching, I was learning. And Nona had some great advice for our online experience of worship that I want to share with you. Nona said this: keep it tight, keep it interesting, keep it engaging, and don't go longer than 25 or 35 minutes. Now that may sound crazy to you, but what we found is that the attention span of people online is very different than the attention span of people in the room.
Squirrel!
You know what I'm talking about, right? There's all these distractions at home. Someone can knock on my door. I can go get coffee. Someone pops up on chat during worship or whatever it is, and there are all these distractions. It's so much different than in the room. Remember that in the room, you control the experience. You control the seating, you control the lighting, you control the refreshments. And so online is just a different experience. Nona actually went on to say, while 25 to 35 minutes is a sweet spot, she said at Facebook, we've been, Nona is the director of, I'm not sure what her new title is. I guess it was in that graphic. She was the director of faith-based partnerships. I think they've expanded it a bit. And what Nona said in that training is that we have looked at the data and people tend to turn it off at about 40 minutes. That's the threshold for online worship. And they will turn it off at 40 minutes, whether you are in the middle of a sermon or a song or whatever. It's like 40 minutes is about what people can handle. That's not everybody, friends, but we do need to make some adjustments. Now, if we're pre-recording, it's easier to create a 25 to 35 minute experience, and then you don't have to compromise the in-person experience at all. So you do your full hour, 15 minutes, hour, 20 minutes, whatever it is in the room, and then online, you might do something a little shorter. Let's talk about the next aspect of worship that we might pre-record, and that is singing. Now, I'm going to ask a question And this is not always a very popular question to ask, but let me ask by show of hands for those who are live during the recording and in the chat, let me ask, how many of you are singing at home in the same way you do in the building? How many of you are like, I stand, I sing, I clap, I sing every verse. I'm not seeing any hands go up. I'm not seeing any responses in the chat. Okay, there we go. Some of you are singing louder and prouder. Some of you, though, are saying no. Here's what I have found in about 2+ years of doing this training. About 80 or 90% of folks are telling me they are not singing at home, or they sing a little, but they're not fully participating. Friends, these are the moments where people tend to walk away from their TVs or come in a little late or whatever. Jason, are you saying we should not sing in our online worship? No, I'm not saying that. But I am saying that we might reduce the amount of singing that we do for an online audience. And if you pre-record your worship, you might just include 1 or 2 songs rather than an entire song set. Whether those are hymns, whether those are camp classics, whether those are contemporary Christian songs, whatever they might be, people just engage in a very different way. The communal experience is different than the experience in the living room. I have 2 kids. I have a 13-year-old daughter, a 16-year-old son, and this is the hardest time I have keeping them in front of the TV is during the music portion of worship. And in the building, they will sing. I don't know if it's self-consciousness about singing around your siblings or what, but they aren't singing in the same way that they do in the room. So here's a tip for you. Since you're going to do worship, if you do this model, since you're going to do worship in the room on Sunday, you might sing, 3 or 4 songs, 4 or 5 songs. I don't know what's a lot or not a lot in your church. But let's say you're going to sing 4 songs. Go ahead during the rehearsal of those songs, because hopefully you're going to prepare for that in-person experience. Record all of them, and then maybe take one of them and include them in your 25 to 30 minute pre-recorded worship. And then you can allow people to opt in. So go ahead and post the entire song set. And in your recording, you might say, hey, if you love to worship in song, we have included on our Facebook page, on our YouTube account, whatever, the entire song set. Friends, also, it's one of the advantages to coming to the building is that we do all of the songs in person. And so we want to encourage you to participate in whatever way is best for you. I think sometimes the songs go on too long. Sometimes we have too many of them. Sometimes there's just distraction in the background. Like, take a look at this. Would this keep you engaged in worship?
Flowing from your heart, filling every part of our praise. Your presence in this place, your glory on our face. We're looking to the sky, descending like a cloud. You're standing with us now, Lord, unveil our eyes.
I'm pretty sure the week after that, they used that as a metaphor for the burning bush, and they set it on fire during the next series. But obviously, if that's what's happening, people might be engaged for the entire song. I don't know. But I think we've got to adapt some of what we do where the songs are concerned. The next thing I want you to consider as you pre-record worship is sermon length. This one, I don't know if this is a positive or a negative for you, but I think that our attention spans, because they're shorter in person, online than they are in person, might mean that we need to do shorter sermons. What I've been encouraging pastors to do is to write the TED Talk version of your sermon. Put it in the chat. How many of you are fans of TED Talks? TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. Did you know that the TED Talks can only be 18 minutes or less? Whether you're Bill Gates or you're a high school teacher or whatever, doesn't matter who you are, your talk can only be 18 minutes. And they figured out that that's about the attention span that people have to take in new information. And so, friends, I would love to think that if we would create sort of the TED Talk version of our sermon for the recorded version of it, it might even go viral. I want to encourage you to go ahead and put together your 25 to 35 minute worship experience, but also post that sermon as its own piece so that people can pass it along. It's just too cumbersome for me to say, Pastor Don had a great sermon this week. You have to fast forward into about 10 minutes in, and it goes from about 10 minutes in to about 25 minutes in, and nobody's going to follow through with that. But if you just post a sermon all by itself, in addition to that, people can pass it along really easily. And remember that you're still going to do your in-person. So if you want to preach a 25-minute, 30-minute, I don't know what's long or short for you, but a longer sermon, you can do that. The last thing that I want to encourage you to think about as you pre-record your worship is giving people some kind of call to action. What do you want them to do? You want them to do something, right? It's important to invite people to do something.
Do or do not. There is no try.
You know, you got to get a little Yoda in there, right? Do or do not, there is no try. And so, friends, I want to make a really radical suggestion to you. And this one might be breaking some traditions. But one of the things that I see a lot in our online worship is that we start with the least compelling thing we have to offer. And that is we start with a bunch of boring announcements. And so we might have a song, and then we'll do something like this. Welcome to worship. We're so glad you're here today. Thanks for coming. Let me share some of the things that are happening in the life of our church. First off, our women's ministry has a Zoom meeting on Monday night, and so you can join that at 6 p.m., and so we hope you'll sign up for that. After that, next week, we're going to have a bake sale. And the proceeds are going to send the kids to summer camp this summer. And we hope that you will bake. Are you bored yet? Because I'm bored and I'm giving these announcements. Friends, that is so easy to turn off. If you start with something that is not very compelling, people are more likely to turn it off. So I want to encourage you to give people what I call an ROI up front, a return on investment. Tell them what they're going to experience if they hang out with you for the 35 minutes that they're going to be with you. Hey friends, my name is Jason, and I am so excited to invite you to worship. We are in a series right now called Finding Our Faith in the Season of Fear. And in week 1, we talked about praying through our fear. And week 2, we talked about how Scripture meets us in our fear. And today, we are going to explore what it means to experience our fear alongside others. And so today, you're going to experience some singing. We hope you'll sing along with us today. You're going to hear Scripture. You're going to hear a message today that will help you really meet that fear that you're experiencing and find God in the midst of it. And so I'm going to invite you to worship along with us today. So what I've just done there is I've kind of given you a reason to stay rather than start with something that's not all that compelling. And now I'm going to make a really radical suggestion. And that is, I'm going to tell you to not do announcements. Don't do announcements. I'm serious about that. What I want to instead ask you to do is to do action steps rather than announcements. So rather than doing a bunch of boring stuff up front, 3 random pieces of information that don't really connect, I want to encourage you to invite people into the experience, tell them what they're going to experience, and then after the sermon, make the announcements action steps. Friends, there are some ways that we can live into this idea that we find our faith in the midst of fear with others. And so I want to give you a few opportunities to live into this. Our women's ministry is meeting at 6 p.m. on Monday night on Zoom. I can't think of a better way to find our faith in the midst of fear than to do it with other people. And facing our fears is always easier when we are in relationship. Second thing is that we have some young people that are in a season of fear. They're just finding their faith. And we're going to have a bake sale to send them to camp, because camp is a place that we find our faith in a season of fear. And I hope that you will consider supporting that. And it's a way that we can live into what we're talking about today. When you make those announcements action steps, they feel purposeful. They feel meaningful. It is an extension of the sermon at that point. And so I hope that you'll consider giving people a call to action. What do you want them to do? Become action-oriented churches rather than having a bunch of boring information that's disconnected up front. I really believe that one of the most important things that we can do for our hybrid worship is to work on relationship development. We're going to talk more about this throughout the rest of today and tomorrow. But having an online worship host can really enhance the experience of worship for people who are not in the building. That host can be in the chat. That host can be on camera. If you're pre-recording, I want to show you an example of what a pre-recorded worship host can do. And then I want to give you some tips on who you're recruiting and why you're recruiting these folks. The one I want to show you here is really simple. And so it's not super high end. I believe this friend of mine who is going to offer a welcome does this on an iPhone, has a ring light. I don't even think he mics himself. So I do think that technology is important, but I also think that authenticity is more important than being slick or perfect. So let's take a look at this example, and then I want to give you a little checklist for online worship hosts.
It's happening December 5th weekend at the Frederick Pike campus. We can't wait to share this experience with you. And that's what's happening here at Stillwater Church.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Stillwater Church Online Campus. I'm Andy, and we're so glad that you joined us today. If this is your first time with us, thanks so much for being here. Grab a cup of coffee and find your favorite spot. We're glad that you're here. We're continuing our Stories of the Kingdom series today, and we'll be hearing a powerful word from Pastor John later on in the service. If you haven't already, say hello in the chat. We also want to remind you about offering. Offering is a moment for us to give back to God for what He has been doing in our lives, in the life of the church. You see, no matter if you give through the website, the Church Center app, or through the mail, your giving makes a difference in the world. Oh, and while you're in the Church Center app, be sure to fill out your Connect cards. They help us know that you're here. And now we want to honor veterans in honor of Veterans Day with a special video. So here it is.
I'm not going to show the whole video, but what I wanted you to see there is that he gives you everything you need to know to be a participant in this experience. First off, he talks directly to you. He says to welcome each other in the chat. He invites you to check in. And again, one of my favorite things about Text in Church is they make it so easy for us to collect information. The digital Connect card is such a valuable tool, and you'll hear more about that a little later from Tyler. He tells you about the series they're in. He sets up the topic of the day, and of course he introduces himself as well. So friends, I want to encourage you to consider having an online worship host. That can just happen in the chat, but on camera can also be very helpful. Let me talk about the checklist that I would recommend for you. The first is that when you recruit somebody to be your digital worship host, that they would be someone that is articulate. That sort of seems like it would go without saying, but every now and then I'll see someone on camera that can't really get anything out and they're not very articulate. And just remember, they are representing your church. So you want to recruit someone that's articulate. Now, you might recruit someone that's very articulate and be like, oh, this person's so well spoken. And then they get in front of the camera and they see that red light, and now they kind of lose it. You also want to find someone that is comfortable on camera, and not everyone is comfortable on camera. The third aspect of a worship host that I would encourage you to look for is someone who understands technology. They don't have to be a techno whiz, but they do need to know which direction to point the camera and that it's not sideways or upside down. They need to know at some level how to light it and so on. This can be a volunteer though. It doesn't have to be a staff person, doesn't have to be a really super tech savvy person, but just understand the technology. This one to me is the most important one of all, and that is that they are available and willing to engage with worshipers. So I don't see this as someone that's just an on-camera personality, but sort of like the digital pastor for those who would worship online. Pastor Andy that you just met told me a story one time that I thought was so inspiring. He said one morning after doing his on-camera piece, he popped in the chat and said, "Good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a great day." And this gentleman in the chat said, "Nope, not me. Having a terrible day. It's been a terrible week, in fact." And he's like, "I'm so sorry to hear that. Hey, I'd love to pray with you today if you'd like to pray with me. I'm going to put my personal Zoom link in the chat. And after worship, I'm going to keep my Zoom room up for about 10 minutes. If you'd like to pray, I'd love to pray with you afterwards." And so worship concluded, and 2 minutes after worship concluded, all of a sudden, he admitted this person into the chat, and this gentleman said, hey, Andy, thank you so much for praying for me today. Here's what's been going on in my life. And he shared, and Andy sort of looked at him curiously, but then prayed. And at the end of the conversation, he said, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't think I recognize you. Have we met before? And this person said, nope, we've never met. I've never actually been to your church. But you have really spoken to me through the worship. And in this moment, when you've invited me into this conversation and into prayer, I just want you to know you're going to see me again. And in fact, one of these days, I'm going to come to your building. And I hope to meet you in person. Just to recognize that we have an opportunity here to build meaningful relationships with people who aren't physically in the space. If it hasn't occurred to you yet, I'm sure it has for many of you, but I think some of us resist this thinking. People who worship with you online are real people, and they really matter, and they really need Jesus, and they can really experience the transcendent power of Jesus through our hybrid worship. And so if we'll build relationships, some of those people will migrate into our building. They will migrate into our faith communities. The last tip that I have for you in this checklist is that these online worship hosts also need to be in the know. They need to know all of the bits and pieces that are happening in your worship so they can be the glue that makes it all hang together. So communicate with them about what the sermon's about, what the music is about, what our theme for the day is, whatever that is, so that they can be that kind of glue that makes it all hang together. All right, I want to shift into real-time both and worship. This is what many of us think of when we think of hybrid worship. And so I want to give you a definition. This is how I define what real-time both and worship is. Worship that is designed in such a way that you're giving attention to both people in person and online simultaneously. This happens live in the moment, so you're live streaming, and may include a combination of live and pre-recorded elements. And so again, there are advantages and disadvantages to this as well. Advantages are things like being able to interact in real time and commenting on the chat. We're doing this right now for those who are recording. And so we can engage with one another in the moment. Disadvantages. You have to deal with all three of those factors I talked about before. You don't get a second take when you are doing it live. When you're pre-recording, I can always do another take and so on. But for me, this particular model has so much to offer. And if I had my way, this would be the one I would love to see every church do if you lean into and reimagine the experience in a both and way. Too many of us just put a camera in the back of the room and we go about business as usual and we don't ever talk to the people at home. Or we talk to them at the beginning and the end and we forget them in the middle. So let's talk about how to kind of lean into this. Let me give you the best metaphor I can think of for what real-time looks like. And that is professional sporting events. You can either go to the stadium, you can be in the stadium in person, or you can be at home watching the game, and there are advantages and disadvantages to both of those experiences. Most of us will never experience a Super Bowl at the stadium. But we get our friends together, we have a great time watching the game, we get to watch the commercials. You know, if you're at the game, I don't think you get to see, I've never been, but I don't think you get to see all the great commercials, so that's a disadvantage to being in the building. In the building, you have to deal with weather. In the stadium, you have to deal with weather, you have to deal with expensive food, you have cheaper snacks at home. You have less disgusting restrooms, I hope, at home than you do at the stadium. You know, you get to participate in the wave when you're at the stadium. There's a communal experience that you have that you don't have at home. But at home, you have instant replay. You have close-ups. You have comfortable seating. You have all sorts of different things. The people who work at the stadium are not really thinking all that much about the home audience. They're trying to give you a great experience if you paid for a ticket. The people running those cameras and in the production trucks aren't thinking all that much about the people in the stadium. They're trying to give an experience at home, a great experience. So how might we begin to create worship where we're giving two different experiences of the same thing that's playing out in real time? Well, I want to talk about a couple of the challenges that we have to face as we think about this. And the first is that we have to deal with the time factor. How can you do your typical hour or hour and 15 minutes or whatever and do the suggested 40 minutes or less that Nona talks about in her training and in her materials? You can actually do that. You can do a both and scenario where you do the full experience in the room and a shorter experience online. Let me give you two different scenarios to consider. The first one I call split the difference. So let's just say, for the sake of example, you typically did an hour in the building when you were only in the building, and then online we love the idea that we would do 40 minutes based on the data that we're hearing from Facebook. So what if you split the difference and you do a 50-minute service rather than a full hour or 40 minutes? Now, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of this particular model, but I see a lot of churches using it. We just decided to make it a little shorter because people at home won't pay attention for the whole hour. The reason I think that doesn't always work so well is that people who actually got up and got dressed and aren't in their pajamas with their coffee in hand, who did their hair and makeup, they don't want you to cut their worship experience 10 minutes short. They want the whole thing. They don't want to feel like you compromised for people who aren't in the room. Some of us have this attitude, and I think it's fair in some cases and not fair in others, that people at home are just lazy. They can feel cheated, as someone said in the chat. So I would not ever argue with your experience. If you have made your service shorter to accommodate both audiences, kudos to you, and if that's worked, great. The second model, though, is the one that I have worked with a number of churches who have used this model and have found it to be very meaningful, and that is what I call the staggered approach. The staggered approach might mean that you would start your worship at a certain time and in person, and then maybe 10 or 15 minutes in, you would start the online experience, and the middle of the service would be in sync, and then you might even dismiss people online before you've dismissed them in the room. And so let me just describe what this can look like. Because there are moments in the room that don't really translate so well to the online experience. We just, I think, established a few minutes ago that a lot of us are not singing at home in the same way that we do in the room. There's something about being with that crowd, singing together, that is different than at home. So what if, now you might have to rearrange your worship order a little bit. What if you started with your singing portion of worship being the majority of it up front, and you don't invite people online in until near the end of that time, and you invite them to sing with you? So let me just paint a picture here. Let's say that we, just for sake of example, we meet at 10 a.m. for in-person worship. And at 10:10, we start our online worship. So at 10 a.m., everyone's in the building. You say, "Good morning, welcome to worship. We are so glad you're here. We are in a series called Finding Our Faith." And by the way, you don't have to look at the camera at all for this part because we're not broadcasting yet. We're in a series called Finding Our Faith in a Season of Fear, and we're in week 3. And so you walk them into what it's all about. And then you say, let's stand together and worship the God who is with us in all that we face. And so you sing song number 1 and song number 2 and song number 3. And then there are 3 different ways that you could invite people online into the experience. Way number 1 is the same person that just welcomed the room would then turn to the camera and say, "We want to welcome those of you who are worshiping with us online. We are in a series called Finding Our Faith in the Season of Fear," and you do a short little intro, and then you'd say, "Let's worship together," and then you'd sing song 4 with the online audience. Song 4 for the room, song number 1 for the people worshiping with you at home. You've cut out 10 minutes of that worship experience, the 10 minutes that they probably aren't fully engaged anyway. And again, if you want to, you can record all 4 of those songs and post them on your social media and invite people to worship, invite them to opt into that rather than potentially turn it off. So I said there are 3 ways. Way number 1 is the easiest technically. The same person welcomes the room, welcomes online, you hear the intro twice. Way number 2 is that you pre-record that intro so that I am the worship leader and I get to song number 3, and at the end of song number 3 I say, let's pray. And I bow my head and I pray with one eye open because we just started the video for the online audience that is not playing in the room that says, good morning, welcome to worship, we're so glad you're here. And that's pre-recorded. And at the end of the video, someone in the back is like 5, 4, 3, 2. And when we get to 1, I open my eye and I say, amen. And then we continue with song number 4, except it's song number 1 for online. The third way you can do this, that's a little bit more technically challenging, is that you use wireless technology and someone is in another room and they do this live. And maybe the chat is open. And so they can actually say, good morning, we are so glad, Carly, that you're here. Jenna, it's good to see you. Roy, hey, we are worshiping this morning. And they're talking during the third song and welcoming people in, and then they time it so that when the song finishes, they engage. I'm going to show you a quick little clip of a church that's doing something like this. What you're not going to hear is that the band is actually playing in the room during this, and she is talking to the online audience, and they're going to join for the last song.
Good morning and welcome to Mosaic Church. My name is DJ and I have the privilege of being your online worship director. Whether you're watching with us at home or right here in the building, we're so happy that you're here. Now, if you're worshiping from home, go ahead and hit that share button. Did you do it? Boom, outreach, great job. We're about to jump into live worship in a second, and I've heard the band rehearsing, and boy, are you in for an incredible encounter with the Holy Spirit. So get your hearts and your minds ready. We'll all leave.
Now, I'm not going to play the whole clip, but basically what's happening is the reason she said we're going to join them in a minute or so is that she's basically vamping until that last song is done, and then they're going to join in and participate in the last song. So then the middle part of your worship is all in sync. The people at home and in the room are experiencing the same thing. And then what if after the end of your worship experience, after the sermon, instead of doing the announcements as action steps as a spoken thing, you might say, friends, we want to invite you. We're a church that is very active. We find our faith in the midst of fear in a lot of different ways. And so I want to invite you to go to our website where you can find out all the latest ways that you can get involved. Then we've just cut out 4 or 5 minutes of announcements for online, and that you've also made those announcements evergreen. Because someone that worships later, when you announce the bake sale on Sunday and it's baked into the recording, that bake sale is long over after I find it 3 weeks later. But if you say go to our webpage where you'll find out all the latest things that are happening in the life of our church, you've now made that evergreen. And so this might be an opportunity to say, if you're worshiping with us online, thanks for coming today. We are so glad you've joined us. Those of us here in the building, we're going to continue to worship in song. You're welcome to hang around as long as you'd like, but at least at that moment, you've given them sort of an opportunity to dismiss. In my church, just a couple weeks ago, they had a prayer moment at the end of worship, and they had a long line of people waiting up front to pray. And the pastors thought, we don't want everybody to have to sit here for 10 minutes while the folks that chose to come up and pray are praying. So they said, hey, we want to dismiss you and invite you back for next week, and you are welcome to come up and pray and hang as long as you want. But they more or less dismissed us so they could say goodbye and invite us to next week and let the worship continue for those who elected to pray. So what you've essentially done is you've created an hour-long experience and a 40-minute online experience in a pocket of that. You cut out the first 10 minutes, and you might cut out the last 10 minutes, and you've got something pocketed within all of that. So it's a little out of the box, but I'll tell you that for a lot of the churches I'm working with, it has been very meaningful and helpful. One more thing to consider in our hybrid real-time both-and worship is that not everything that you do in the room translates. When we engage in the act of communion, a lot of us do what I call the rip and sip packets, these little packets that people get. During COVID, we kind of moved to those. Some of us are still using them. Some of us are not. I've heard them called snack packs too, which feels a little, sacrilegious. But I need to copyright Rip and Sip, as someone is suggesting in the chat. Friends, the thing is when we do those moments for those at home, people at home may disconnect throughout that experience because you're not really talking to them or you're not really including them in it. So make sure you give instructions for people at home. Some of you may be in a tradition where you don't feel theologically like it's okay to bless communion over the World Wide Web. And if that's the case, you can bless those elements ahead of time, invite people to come pick them up at your church through the week, and then they can participate on the weekend. Or I know churches that do a drive-by communion, and people can come after the service and just pull up in their car and participate in that way. But since everything in the room doesn't translate, I want to encourage you to consider something I call alternate moments. And that is having something that will keep people at home engaged when you're doing other things in the room. So one church that I've done some work with does a huge backpack blessing and drive. And so these backpacks go to kids that are in foster care and things like that. And I'll tell you that in the room, it's inspiring to see all those backpacks come forward. But at home, it's 3 minutes of just watching people take backpacks up, and it doesn't feel the same because sometimes people are like standing in front of the camera and you're seeing someone's backside instead of a backpack, which is probably not as inspiring. So what if, when you have a moment like that, you give people an alternate experience at home? So you might say, here in the room, we're going to invite you to bring the backpacks forward as we bless them. At home, here's what our backpack blessing is all about.
Hey, CLC family. What an exciting time we live in human history. As we look around and we see the needs and people that are really struggling the most, as a church, we've found creative ways to help people. One of the ways that we want to help people, and we continue to help people, is through our annual book bag giveaway to our kids that are in foster care. Once again, we're going to partner with Bethany.
I'm not going to play the whole video, but I wanted you to see enough of it to see that you can show that video to people at home so they understand what the backpack blessing is, the ministry you're partnering with. They're going to stay engaged for that 3 minutes where they might choose to turn it off because it's not the same as in the room when you're watching that at home. So friends, I hope that you will consider alternate moments and what that might look like. Also, I want you to consider that there are 4 ways that people are engaging in our worship, 4 different congregations that we can kind of bring together into one as we do worship both online and in the room. And so I want to talk about how you can make the experience interactive for all of them. We talked a little bit about 3 different ways that people engage language-wise, but this is how you can get everybody on the same page for worship. So consider these 4 groups. You've got people that are worshiping with you in person. They're there with you. You've got people that are at home but are connected to your church. So they already know you. They're in the fold. They're your frequent flyers. You've got a 3rd group of people who are guests who might be a guest at home that are worshiping with you for the first time, or they might be in the room. And then the 4th group of people that you have with you are those who are worshiping with you on delay. And so how can you make what you do in worship engage all 4 of those groups of people? And it's important for you to think about how do we engage folks in all those things. I want to show you an example of a series where we had an interactive prayer that we did for the season of Advent right around Christmas time. And I want to show you how you can engage all 4 of those groups. I hope that you'll look for opportunities for how to engage all 4. So we had a series that we did called Unpacking Christmas, and it was basically the idea of unpacking the true meaning of Christmas and what it's really all about. And so on week 1, typically the season of Advent is the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. And on week 1, we said, we want you to consider the true meaning of the season. So today we're going to do an interactive prayer together. Now in the room, this was the instructions. We've got 3 stations. In station number 1, you'll find paper and a pen. We're going to invite you to write down a prayer. Station 2, you can put that prayer in a box. Station 3, you can wrap it up, put a bow on it. And then we want to invite you to put that under your tree. And then on Christmas morning, when you are unwrapping your presents, we want you to unwrap that gift and pray that prayer together that will help you remember the true meaning of the season. Now, this is wonderful for people in the room. But what about the second group? What about those people who worship from home that you know that aren't in the building? Well, you know those people. So you can do a send-ahead kit. Send them a kit that has the paper, the box that's folded up, maybe a little bit of wrapping paper and a bow, and you can organize maybe a group of people to go deliver those to their homes or whatever. Some people are still, believe it or not, I know in some parts of the country it's different, but there are some people who still don't feel comfortable in the building. So if you're going to engage them fully, do a send-ahead kit. But what about group number 3? You've got guests who showed up online who did not know to sign up for a send-ahead kit. Well, you might consider doing a digital version of it. So, by the way, you'd introduced this early in the worship. So we're going to do a little interactive prayer today. We just put in the chat the link to a PDF file to create a box and to even create some wrapping paper. So go ahead and download that. It's in the chat right now. And cut that out. Start to make that box. We're going to tell you at the end of worship what to do with it. It's going to be a flimsy box, but that's okay. But we hope that you will participate even if you're worshiping with us from home. And then the last group in that 4 groups that we talked about are those who worship on delay. Post those same links along with your videos so that someone can download and participate with you after the fact. By the way, some of you still do, and it's fine if you do, and it's okay if you don't, some sort of a print piece in worship. That might be, you might call it a bulletin, a worship folder, a program, whatever you call it. I want to encourage you, if you're not doing so, to make sure that you make a digital version of that. Put it in the chat for those who worship with you live, and also make sure you put it on your description for those who worship with you on delay, so they can download it and print it out and follow along in the way that they're accustomed to when they are in the building. All right, so let's talk about post both and worship. I define post both and worship in this way. Post both and worship is worship that is recorded live with a future audience in mind. You're only going to offer it to the people in person in real time. The people who are worshiping with you online are going to worship on delay. So you're going to capture it. You're going to have cameras in the room in the morning when you do it. You're going to capture it, repurpose it, and offer it on delay. And so one of my favorite churches to talk about that's doing this is a small little country church out in the middle of nowhere in Ohio. Their name will tell you everything you need to know about them. They're called Farmersville United Methodist Church. So they don't have a lot of people. They don't have a lot of technology. They're not a big church. They don't have a lot of money. But here's what they do. 9 a.m. people gather in person for worship. The cameras are running. At the end of worship, 9:45, 9:50, they immediately take that footage. They put it on a computer. They have pre-recorded a couple of announcements, a couple other things for worship. They did that before the service. They take the sermon and a song or two, add it to the recording. I think they have to drive into the city. They upload it, and by 11 a.m., their online worship is up. So you can either come to the 9 a.m. service in person, or you can worship with them at 11, which they just recorded at 9. Now you might say, well, that's way too, that's too aggressive. We can't do that. I just want to remind you, this is a small little church in the middle of nowhere, cornfields all around it. They figured it out. But if that's too aggressive for you, you might consider just doing a 1-week delay. So you record it this Sunday and you air it next Sunday. And so you've got the whole week to edit it if you'd like to. It just means that you're going to be off online by 1 week. Now, some of you may be in churches that do broadcast ministry anyway, like on a local cable access channel or whatever. You've probably had to do that anyway, because most of the time you don't broadcast that live Anyway, and so there are certain weeks that's not going to work as well. Mother's Day, Father's Day, Easter, Christmas. That might be when you would shift to both and worship. But if you're in a rural area, if you don't have fast internet, this is a solution for you to participate in hybrid ministry as well. So I just want to say there's something for everyone. Everyone has the opportunity to do this. I want to give you one other quick little tip, and that is that if you do real-time both and worship, and you're doing the entire hour, 15 minutes, whatever, you might also consider creating a post both and worship version of your service, where you edit it after the fact. You take the sermon, a couple songs, make a more curated version of that worship experience, because a lot of us have people worshiping on delay now. They worship with us later. And what I'm hearing from all of my pastor friends, all of my church leader friends, is that they look at the analytics and they find that they skip oftentimes past things to get to the sermon. Well, if you have a 25-minute version of that service, they may sing a song, they may pray with you, they may hear the scripture and participate in the sermon. What if you give them a curated example of worship in your archive? So after the fact. So live stream it on Sunday morning and then edit it for a later time. All right, I want to just share a couple of last things with you here. Just some general effectiveness tips, regardless of which of the models that you choose. The first one is that I think it's important to speak to the moment that we're living in right now. Especially through the pandemic, and as difficult as things are in our world, we're in a very divided culture these days. It's easy to sort of say, oh, we don't want to bring any bad news in. I think it's important for us to speak to the moment that we're living in and not avoid it. But I think you have to hold that intention with the idea of creating evergreen worship that I talked about yesterday. So we want to give context so it still makes sense today, even though we're speaking to now. I want to show you really quickly here what I did for Easter 2020 when they had shut our buildings down. I had some United Methodists out of Pennsylvania contact me and say, will you help us resource our churches for Easter because we can't be in the building? Will you help us create a resource set? And I worked with some folks. We brainstormed together, and first we talked about all the typical Easter stuff, rainbows and bright colors and blue skies and empty tombs, and it just felt like that didn't really speak to the moment we were in. So I want to show this to you. I had to do it so quick, I didn't even get to hire a voiceover artist. I just had to do it myself. But this is how we did Easter, and then I'll just say a word or two about why we chose this direction.
Doors. So many closed doors. School doors are closed. Stores and restaurants. Stadiums, theaters. All locked up. Even our sanctuary doors are closed tight. The doors are all closed, sealed tightly, and locked, leaving us with such a heavy feeling in a season of celebration. The places we gather to break bread and worship should not be closed. Not on this day. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel right. Like the disciples who were locked away in the upper room after Jesus' death, we too might feel that all hope is lost in this present time. But on this morning, the stone that sealed the tomb where Jesus was laid to rest didn't sit idle. And as it broke free from its resting place, Jesus conquered death itself. Today, we invite you to experience Hope Unlocked.
So this was a piece that I put together and animated, and really the whole purpose of it was to speak to the moment we were living in. we knew that people were going to encounter doors, lots of closed doors. You had to go out to get the mail. I mean, this was way back when we were all still locked down. And the reason I share this with you is that I think it's important that we give people images. Jesus always used metaphors. He used mustard seeds and lamps on stands and yokes and all of these things to bring the gospel to life outside of the moment. He was speaking to the moment they lived in, and it lived beyond the moment. So I wanted to share that with you as a way of thinking about how do we speak to now and give context to what we're dealing with. Second tip that I want to share with you is that it's important to build an intentional chat strategy and digital hospitality team. This is where I think Text in Church has so much to offer. You have the opportunity to use the digital Connect card. And the cool thing about that is that you can put that digital Connect card in the chat, or you can have a keyword that people can text to. That means they don't even have to be in the chat to participate in it. Tyler will talk more about this in implementation sessions, but lean into that because it's a really, really great resource. The third thing I think we want to do is to lean into social media. Use hashtags, encourage your folks to use those hashtags to share your worship with others. Yesterday we talked about how sharing our faith is easier than it's ever been. Carey Nieuwhof has this great quote that I love to share. He talks about how right now pastors are using online to bring people to the building, but he really believes that in the future pastors will use the building to get people online. And I think that if we lean into social media and other opportunities to connect with folks, we will really experience some growth in the church. And then a plan to connect. We're going to spend more time talking about the plan to connect tomorrow. But the wonderful thing is Text in Church has, even in your workbook, a guest follow-up plan. There's an orange easy button, and Tyler will tell you more about this in the implementation section, but there are opportunities to do automated emails and text and reminders. And so, again, I really encourage you to lean into that. You'll find it in your handbook, and Tyler's going to tell you a whole lot more about it. Also want to let you know that there is an upcoming conference that is all about the guest follow-up. Text in Church or Engage is actually offering this conference, and you can get a free ticket to it. It's going to happen August 30th through September 1st. And there's 8 speakers that are going to talk about their guest follow-up plan. And I would encourage you to register for that, claim your free ticket. Again, Tyler will give you more details on how to participate in that. But I know I will be there. I hope you will be as well. And then the last thing, friends, is that I want to encourage you to get an outsider's perspective. The truth is, we are all so close to the worship that we offer that we can't really see the forest for the trees. I mentioned to you a few different times that I do secret worshiper consultations. And so I basically worship as a guest and I give feedback. You certainly can hire me to do that. I'd be happy to do that for you, but you don't need me to do that. Ask a trusted friend, ask a colleague. Hey, listen, I'll secret worship your church if you'll secret worship mine. Where are we using insider language? Where do things get a little bit confusing for the outsider? Where are we not talking to folks at home, and so on? And I'm going to do a giveaway right now, so you can win a secret worshiper consultation with me. And so all you have to do is text the word worship to 816-484-3384, and we're going to do a drawing for those who are participating in the recording and those who are live during the event. And so text worship to that number and we will pick a winner. I'm going to share one final little list that will be in your handbook. And I call this the both and audit. Very quickly, I want to walk down 7 things. We'll just call this a checklist, and you can check these off as you're planning worship, and then we will end our time and look forward to coming back tomorrow and talking about hospitality. So this is what I call the both and audit. It's a little tool I created. I would encourage you, as I said yesterday, to assign advocates to both the in-person experience and the online experience. 7 questions to ask. What is the purpose of this particular aspect of worship, and does it translate to both audiences, really all four audiences that we talked about. The second thing that I would encourage you to ask is, does this moment belong in both experiences? Not everything will, and so you might bounce between things that are happening in the room and things that are happening online. Is there a participatory or interactive way of doing this? I said yesterday, we've got to get away from the language of calling people at home watchers, but they'll only ever be watchers or viewers, not participants or worshipers, if we don't give them an opportunity to participate. So I'm hoping that you'll look for opportunities for them to participate and interact with you in your worship. Is this particular thing that we're talking about right now too long or too short for either audience? Some things may be too short or too long for online or in person. Number 5, how does this translate on screen at home, and do we need an alternate moment? Number 6, do we need additional contextualization for either audience? Remember that people in the room can turn their head. They can see everything. At home, you only get what the camera shows you. You may have to describe some things that are happening in the room and give context for people who are not in the room. And then finally, how will a first-time viewer or in-person guest receive what we're doing? Remember that you have to explain your rites, your rituals, your practices, and even who you are to those folks. The final thing I want to just share with you again is that you have the opportunity for a free 60-day pro membership from Text in Church to implement a lot of the things that I'm talking about today. You can scan that QR code. The link is in the chat. And friends, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to really lean into what it means to create an experience where no one feels like an afterthought. Thank you for coming. Thanks for your participation today. And I hope that you'll come back tomorrow when we're going to talk about both and hospitality. I'll
get back to Tyler. Hey, thank you so much, Jason. Hello, everyone. I'm back again with you for Jason.